the motion for this House reads, sure. Before we continue, OG, so we are recording the round. If you'd not like to be recorded, please put it in the chat so that we know. Thank you very much. So the motion for this House reads, this House, as a Republican candidate for Congress in a competitive race in an upper middle class swing district, would choose to run on a neoconservative policy platform rather than a populist policy platform. With the motion, we invite the Prime Minister to address the House here.
Hi, am I clearly audible? Okay, I'll take at least one from CO, which is apparently just Chris twice again. So Chris asked me at least one PY. You can, Zach is here in spirit. 1 second. All right. Yeah, you can unmute, you can type on chat. I don't mind, either is fine. Am I being recorded? The recording stopped, right?
No,
Do you
Shar,
prefer
yeah,
to be
you're being
recorded?
recorded.
I am being recorded?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, okay, fine. I'm fine with that. Okay. I will start in a few seconds. It's really difficult to convince a bunch of upper middle class people who work in the director position or the management position of an MNC that we should put tariffs on the people who supply them with raw materials. It's also very difficult to convince students who have made a huge identity and personality out of fighting for their rights and pushing for change and believing in the types of futures they can create by saying, you know what, we're going to gun down those protesters because they're violent people. I think the type of people who like populist policy just aren't in these swing states. And that's what the opening government case is. First, why exactly is the election right now the most important incentive for this actor? The first reason is that it's the most certain thing for the actor. We know they're a politician, they're running for election. That's the only thing we really know about them. They might not care about money, they might not care about relationships. We don't know what the fuck their relevance in this debate is. All we know is they've put in the effort over lots and lots of time to the future is highly speculative. Things could change. People don't remember the policies you put in forth. Often people don't know what you said in the past because the media cycle changes. The incentive analysis for this is simple. J.D. Vance called Trump the new Hitler. He is now his running mate. The Republican Party knows that often they have to work with people who disagreed with them. And more importantly, they also throw away people who were loyal to Trump, at which point the future of your political career or how people perceive you is quite uncertain. But what you do right now is important. But third, winning an election, or more importantly, getting more votes in it, even if we don't win, is the only way you get leverage for sponsor who is more likely to win this election and nothing else. First, why are you likely to have a candidate, why are you likely to have a district which cares the most about things like free trade and democracy, particularly free trade? First, note that these districts are upper middle class. If you read the news, you know this. But second, even if you really don't believe the fact that, what the headlines of the newspapers in the world are saying aren't true, they're still in swing states like what? Georgia, Michigan, Detroit, right? In those places, the places where people are highly working class and don't care that much about things like free trade are never going to vote Democrat at all because they've seen things like unemployment. This is often swing districts, not swing states. And those swing districts are urban areas where people have to decide between, for example, reduced taxes and so on, or, for example, a bit more subsidy towards people who are more liberal. These are the places we're talking about. But third, you need to believe this because they're upper middle class. If they were people who were working class and desperately needed jobs from local industries that were failing, they wouldn't be upper middle class because then they would be lower middle class. They are losing jobs. They are facing recessions. They're also not spending that much. So demand isn't high enough to invest in the area. So these people have to be educated, not intelligent people, sorry, highly educated and often more rich people. Okay, why does that mean that they care a fuck ton about free trade? First, note that these voters also depend on free trade for their advancement and mobility in life. How do these people perceive themselves? Often they go to office, they want to be a better person in their company, they want to make more money, they want to go up the career ladder. This is often the most relevant thing to them because it's what they do day in, day out. They spend 8 hours in the office, they come back 5 days a week. Often they come back and requires less tariffs because often the way that you make more money as an exporter in the US is to sell to other countries who don't import tariff you. So if you have tariffs on, for example, a less open business environment to other businesses, what does this do? It means you as a person get less money for your company because you don't get the cheap raw materials you need from China to make the solar power plants that you're trying to sell to the US government, but also you don't get to expand the huge services that you're selling to Indonesia and Malaysia's rich Novo people who come in to give you lots of money, right? Second of all, it's also important to you because you are educated enough to know the direct impacts it's going to have on your economy. You know what happens as a result of this is often the taxes that you pay simply don't cover the cost of the taxes, the money you're going to lose by putting in import tariffs, which means you see the debt rising as a result of this, which means you have to make more interest payments and the government has less money for you. This is particularly salient for upper middle class people who see things like funding in their businesses for subsidies going down, who see things like funding to things like infrastructure that they care about, like a community center, go down because they know import tariffs are going to cause this in the first place. But third, you often depend on things like your businesses because this is the direct role you are responsible for. You might have workers who want protectionism, you might have people who don't want to be cut out of their jobs, but you as an employee, personal role in this is often your expertise in expanding to larger international markets. The US is a larger importer in the world because the companies within the US depend on large global networks. As a result, your personal job and responsibility is dependent on whether you can get cheaper things like contracts and raw materials. So it's not just that you want to get a role that you advance in, it's also that your own expertise isn't domestic. You can be replaced when things like protectionism become more often common. As a result, you want someone who knows more about the domestic market than someone who went to a fancy university and then talked to a bunch of people around the world like Amitai or Aiden. As a result, you don't want to lose your expertise and comparative advantage against everyone else through tariffs. And finally, you are educated enough not to be blinded by nonsensical rhetoric because you have access to professors in your universities. You have access to data that you can get from the computers that you can access. As a result, you know that this will fuck you over and you simply will not vote for a candidate who supports this in the first place. Second, democracy is really important, especially to the youth who are often the deciding factors in these elections. Before that, see you if you have anything, if not, Franca.
Then why don't these people vote Democrat?
They do. That's why it's a swing district. The thing that's stopping them is the fact that the Democrats tax things like their businesses, which they want more money for. And the reason that they often are thinking about voting Democrat is because Trump hasn't pushing for tariffs. But the other reason they don't vote for Democrats might be social reasons, which brings me to my second claim. Often, people are very anti-woke in America because they've realized that it's gone too far, but they're also anti-right-wing because that has also gone too far. Most people recognize polarization is quite high. They know that often the people on the other side aren't to be trusted, and so they might demonize the other side, they might think that they're good people, whatever. It doesn't matter. The point is, if you're highly educated and you're upper middle class, a few things happen. First, you know that people will often disagree with you and hence go out to protest and do things like actually say the policies that the government pushed are bad. At the point where you see things like in the literal garden in the middle of New York, the police being sent in to shut those people up, you become scared because as a moderate swing voter, you might disagree with some of these policies. And as someone who's rich enough to actually participate in these protests and not be scared for your life, you often want to participate because you want to influence the government, because you have the actual capacity to do so. When you're afraid the government can shut that down, you don't want to vote for a candidate that would continue letting that happen. Second of all, often in these places, you ideologically want to be seen as a good person. An upper middle class person often lives in a more diverse neighborhood. That's why it's a swing district, because there are people who disagree with you. At which point, if you understand that your viewpoints on democracy are going to be perceived as dangerous to other people, it's also difficult to then justify that vote to other people. You become scared for their lives. You don't think everyone on the other side is evil if you're in a swing district. You often perceive that they might actually be harmed by this. So your own family tells you, why are you voting for someone who will stop my democratic rights? And it's more easy for you to vote for someone who seems more normal. At which point you'll get more of an election share, which is the most important thing in this debate.
Thank you very much to the speaker for that very fine speech. Hello.
Thanks. Can you hear me? Cool. We agree with OG that you want to be elected, but we completely disagree on the metric by which you will be elected. Before I go into my speech, a couple points of rebuttal. Firstly, on this characterization of upper middle class and what it means. I think OG completely conflates upper middle class with rich. I do not agree that upper middle class people are like management positions, incredibly highly educated. I think they put them far too high on the economic scale. I think they're still working. They still care a lot about whether their jobs exist, etc. I don't think they're established that much. Secondly, I think OG puts a lot too many eggs in the basket of free trade being good. I'm going to completely flip this in my speech, but just on rebuttal. What do they say about protectionism? They say that it's bad because like you need cheap resources and stuff. I point out that the comparative, if you're not importing resources from China, is you're importing them from the US. And the reason this is crucial is because I think US people and US citizens care much more about US industries being benefited than those in China. So what this means is that instead of buying like coal from China, you import it from a US coal plant, which directly benefits the people in these swing states. So it benefits people because you get jobs for the people in the coal mines in the US. You generate more money because you're literally putting the income straight back into the US rather than putting all your money in like taking money away from the circular flow by importing from China. You keep the money within the US economy, you keep it circulating. That's what generates growth for the US that rather than for China, which makes US businesses do much better. So I think even if you end up getting higher costs of production, often this means that you're benefiting the people that like manufacture and the people that produce these resources within the US, which are probably the people in these swing states. Secondly, they kind of also conflate this idea of tariffs on imports and exports. I'd note there's a big difference. Protectionism means that you're putting tariffs on other people exporting to you. So it means you're not importing as much. You're not taking as many imports from China. Crucially, what you can still do is have just as many exports into other countries. And this marginalizes a lot of their problems because as a US exporter, you can still make just as much money by selling all your cars, all your oil, all your other products to other countries. What is crucial, though, is that that means you're getting more money. You're protecting yourself from foreign industry. On the comparative, what the problem is if you have free trade, you get countries like Bangladesh and China making incredibly cheap goods. So you have like clothing manufactured for 10 cents like on the per product coming into your country. And the reason why this is so crucial is because your economy then gets flooded by all these foreign goods, which I agree are much cheaper, which means your own industries cannot compete. And insofar as these people care a lot about US industry because they're literally the direct benefactors of them, you benefit much more if you're middle class from protectionism. So what this means on protectionism, people buy American, they buy American good. This is literally why Trump is winning, because he says America is prioritized, not the people in Mexico, not the people in China. Similarly, currently, what protectionism does is it means that you have to hire within the US. Like as a country, if you're not doing protectionism and you're doing free trade, why hire expensive American workers when you can get Zoom workers in China for a third of the price? This is much better for us because it means you prevent this by doing protectionism. You say jobs must stay within the US. You must only prioritize the US. Now I'm going to get into my constructive on comparative analysis as to why you get much more support as a candidate when you go for populism. Three mechanisms. Firstly, you can capitalize on support from Trump. And note, Trump is like more popular than any of these people. He has the biggest force to rally people. He has the most political capital. He's the most campaign funding. He's already propagating loads of media out there trying to get himself elected. The reason this is crucial is because if you side with Trump, i.e., you shift your policies in line with the policies that he's pushing, it means you're much more able to capitalize from his support. This is because he's able to endorse you. He says, you are pushing similar policies to the ones that I'm doing, so I'm going to put you on my political campaign and tell all my voters to also vote for you. It looks like you getting donations from Trump's fund because you're supporting policies of his and you're putting your political position in line with his. On their comparative, you cannot do this. You literally distance yourself from Trump by putting in different policies. And Trump, as I said in this actor, has much more power than any other actor in this debate. He's able to cause you to get a lot more votes, which you wouldn't get on the other side. This is the tipping point in the election. Moreover, another mechanism, anti-immigration. So what we stand behind in protectionism is kind of discouraging immigration, things like building a wall, etc. The reason why this is likely to get a lot of support, especially among upper middle class people, is because they're likely to be very anti-immigration. They're likely to be very racist, very xenophobic, and they don't like the idea of other people coming in and taking US jobs, both because the people that work for them are like screaming that, and they're worried their own jobs are going to get taken by educated immigrants coming in. So by fueling this anti-immigrant sentiment, you're much more likely to get them on side. Finally, on fewer interventions. I think this is also a pretty big thing because a lot of Americans are deeply worried that their kids are going to be conscripted to go to the war in Israel or Ukraine. What we do through this populism is we scorn this idea of foreign interventions. We say we're much less likely to go in, which means you get on the comparative far less support on their side of the house because people don't want these interventions. Take a POI from closing.
Yeah, so the kinds of upper middle class people we're talking about don't really care about cheap imports flooding the US market because they work primarily in the service sector. They're doctors and lawyers who don't have to outcompete those sorts of things.
No.
You care
I
about
think
cheap imports.
I think this is in tension with what your opening said. They're likely to be in relatively high positions in all the different industries. So this looks like people that work on like in the manufacturing industry, probably not as manual laborers, but as like managers of the people on the ground. I just don't think this is the correct characterization. So why do we care so much about this support? And I note I'm kind of worried, like I'm going to do some preemptive here on this idea of why you should cater to Democrats. We don't really care about going onto the more liberal side because crucially in this election, what matters is turnout from the Republicans that you're trying to get. So currently, if all the Republicans voted for you as a candidate, you are much more likely to get elected because I think something like only 40% of people end up actually going to vote. If you can get the 60% to turn up to your election, you care much more about this than about catering to more liberal people, which means you're much more likely to capitalize on the people that currently aren't voting for you. Therefore, what we've proven to you today is that as a populist candidate, you're much more likely to get support from the Republicans within your state, and therefore you're much more likely to get elected by causing much more turnout by guaranteeing their vote rather than them voting for someone else. Proud to oppose.
Thank you to the speaker for that very fine speech. We'll call on the DPM to summarize the case for the opening call.
Am I clearly audible? Okay. 3, 2,
Amitai,
1. Yeah,
can you check the last message I sent you just once?
LMAO. Yes, that's fine. 3, 2, 1. I'm going to talk about two main things in this speech: economic policy and social issues. Before that, I want to actively flip what they say in terms of the Republican Party's support of you as a candidate. And this is a flip, which means it's positive content for OG. Okay, on Trump synergy. So I have a couple of reasons I want to give for why Trump's survival in the party, or Trump's form of Trumpism, through successors like J.D. Vance, etc., won't be here for long. Two reasons for this. First, there's an inflation of the sort of populist rhetoric that Trump has been using that's no longer relevant after many years of Trump in power. The idea that the establishment has fucked over young men who are unemployed maybe doesn't go away to the extent that they don't stop liking Trump, but suddenly their problems still exist and a magic wand hasn't made them all disappear, which is why the next Trumpist candidate can't inspire as much voter enthusiasm if they no longer seem an ideology that is out of touch with the establishment and that can truly promise to reform it if they have been in power for a while and haven't succeeded to. The second, more practical reason is that the anti-Trump caucus within the Republican Party, being Nikki Haley, DeSantis, Cruz, and Pence, have vied for the primaries against Trump many times, which is why they have delegates within the RNC right now that are loyal to them and have more public image within Fox News and other Republican platforms than Trump's successors, which didn't run against him against the primaries and thus have less name recognition and less of an established name or campaign. This is important because those anti-Trump candidates are likely to rally against the Trump successor next time, since they're ideologically similar as we saw this time, and this combined political power means that they're likely to lead the party in the future. This means that the extent to which the Republican Party supports you is actually better when Trump is no longer in power. And you care about this long-term support of the Republican Party more than you do right now for two reasons. First, if it's in the long term, it obviously applies for more years than the next 4 years of a Trump presidency, if the candidate relevant for the Republican Party will be true for the next 10. But secondly, because you already have a guaranteed spot as the Republican nominee, per motions clarifications, which is why you don't care as much if you might be able to run your own campaign and don't need as much funding, since funding has already been decided for many of the congressional races. Remember, we're 3 weeks from an election. You care more about the support you'll get in the future when you're not certain if you'll be nominated for more senior positions, which is how I flip that. First clash on economic policy. They say something that's very confused. First, you're not a manager of a major company in the US, likely. We agree. Then they say, but you don't like it because you might be a manager of a major internal company that's competing with China. Let's be very clear about the characterization of most people that live in the suburbs of New York and California. These are people who, as Sharia already explained, are educated, which means they have jobs as a programmer or doctor, like CG say, but not only a manager of a retailer franchisee within the specific region, even if you don't manage an entire company. The point is, these are people who earn sustainable wages. They don't need government support. They just want less income taxes taken away. They want to retain their home without paying high interest on the mortgage because there are higher taxes on their property values, etc. Why does this matter? Literally note that LO concede that products are cheaper from China. Why does that mean that this is so good for this voter group? First, it literally means, also I don't have time, so if someone could post it in the chat, that would be great. First, everyone is consumers. Every one of those households consumes. They need money for their children. They need school, etc. This means that it's cheaper for them. Secondly, in positions like being a retailer within a company or a doctor, etc., it's likely that I do need to buy supplies from China, etc. I do need to buy the medicine or the literal manufacturing goods that I use in order to construct my next real estate project. And if I can buy them for cheaper as wholesale from China than from American producers, it's much better for my company and much more likely that it can stay afloat and pay me as an exec working within it, or just an important guy in a programming company more if it's cheaper to hire the software that we need, etc. But thirdly, notice that in many of the cases that they describe, there aren't American counterparts for producers. This is why America is dependent on China to begin with, because there are no longer manufacturing plants in Detroit. There are no longer cheap textile factories. All of this has been outrooted to China, which is why there are very, very few of the population of producers that they actually talk about. This is why it really is good that things are cheaper. But we have other reasons for why it's economically good. We tell you that Trump's tariff plan is something that for anyone who watches CNN, which we characterize this person is likely to, anyone who knows what a fucking deficit is and watched the debate knows that Trump's plan is likely to incur massive expenses upon the US, which will have to be paid in the form of taxes to the average Joe. I want to weigh why the impact that we prove on taxes and on the cost of goods matters most in the round. First, it literally applies to any voter group in any country. Ethnic groups in Arizona might object to immigration more than Arab Americans in Michigan that like it. Similar different social takes exist in different contentious counties across the United States. But literally no contentious voter likes to have their money taken away. It's a universal issue. Second, this is an issue that your local representative decides on more than other issues, because local municipalities can decide funding in the sense that they decide property taxes and sales taxes for local constituencies. This isn't true for federal issues like immigration or like social issues such as if abortion is legal, which are decided at the state level like a senator. So it's less likely that you view your local constituency and your local district as having agency in deciding things like immigration. But they do have agency on deciding your tax policy. They do have agency in deciding whether Trump is able to pass his tariffs against China in Congress and things of that sort, which is why economy also affects more people. I want to now talk about social policy and why we win on that metric as well. Before that bottom half.
Protect the time.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Social policy. We think that Sharia's characterization explains to you why many of the wealthy landed elite that live in the suburbs that this motion talks about are people who are bipartisan in nature. They lived during great society when there were no significant differences between Democrats and Republicans. In the Obama administration and previous administrations like Bush, when other partisan members were hired as advisors to partisan boards, they don't like division and they don't like the young people that have penetrated the Republican Party that they have voted to, like J.D. Vance and Marjorie Taylor Greene. These young people are ones that they trust less than people like Liz Cheney, who are landed elite within the Republican Party, who are people who like and support unity over divisiveness and who have denounced Trump. We think that this means that those landed elite voters, those wealthy suburban moms, are less likely to vote for someone that retorts these ideas of unity. But it also antagonizes Democrats more strongly. The young apathetic voters in California and New York who know their states will vote for president don't want to go and vote for this congressional candidate. For all those reasons, OG.
Thank you very much to the speaker for that fine speech, DLO.
Am I audible? Okay, great. 1 second. Be wise in chat, please, not during the speech. Panel, if you're ready. Okay. In 3, 2, 1. The funny thing about the entire OG case, and you see this a lot in the debate world, is that the case is essentially that all the right wing's problems would be fixed if they were just a little bit less right wing and more left wing. But the problem in this debate is that the question is what gets you elected as a Republican in this swing state. And that is often not whether you run the best policies or the right policies or whether the entire world should be a Democrat, because in that sense, I think most debaters will agree. But the reasoning is, how do you get elected compared to the opponent that you're against? And in a swing state, it often means you need to set yourself apart from the person that you are running against and not nuance down all of the policies that you're otherwise running. Hence my POI. Why, if you do this, people wouldn't, and people actually would like this, won't they just go for the better version of this, which is the Democrats, which is their own framing? The bulk of my speech will be why putting yourself apart from a Democrat is probably going to make people turn out more, and that is probably going to influence more whether you get elected or not. And the reasons why people vote for you is not necessarily whether policy works, but often what their previous experiences were in these elections. Before I go on, I think it's good to set some framing right. Most of the framing we get from OG is to say that free trade is good. I think in the Infoslide it says quite clearly that to a certain extent, free trade exists under both sides of the house, but they need to run on more than just saying on our side, there's more free trade and in some form of economic policy, that is going to turn out better for upper middle class people, because they also need to run on other things. Say, for example, that there's going to be more expenditure in like overseas military involvement, which a lot of upper class people are against because they know that that also raises their taxes the moment that there's going to be more arms involvement in Ukraine. There is lots and lots of taxes going towards all the war effort in Israel. And I think the same upper class people who work in, I don't care if they're doctors or not, or what kind of jobs they have, still think that that is a really bad idea. But I think the third reason on why I think the framing is completely unfair is because most of these people do see and felt the policies that were given to them by, for example, making cars a lot cheaper because they are indeed still consumers. That means that a lot of times the policies that populists did were directly impacting them, regardless of what they did in their job. To give you a good intuition bump here, the fact that I worked at a PR company doesn't mean that all my politics and political choices are now involved only around what it does for other PR companies. It is some of my interests, but not all of them. I think the biases amongst these people on, say, for example, being against immigration because it is framed as something that is going to take away their jobs, or because they feel some sense of solidarity with other Republicans or other people in thinking that they should probably not be taken away from their jobs, or because they think lower class people should get a fair chance, is still going to impact these people just as much. So the entire assumptive framing of this is legit better for them and people somehow know exactly what is good for them, I think is highly assumptive on OG. Why is it better to make yourself more distinguished from the other candidate than, say, do a watered down version of the policies that they're saying? I already gave you an introduction in the first one. Most of the policies they're proposing are almost exactly the same as the policies that the Democrats are proposing. Think about it this way. If I see a shoe that is like moderately red, and I want a red shoe, and then I see a shoe that is really, really red, then comparatively, I probably will choose a shoe that is really red, given the fact that I want a really red shoe. So the same happens with exactly in these swing states, and people are not really sure about what to decide and whether they think that the Democrats or the Republicans are better. So when they already have all the incentive and all the intuitions that, like Shoria says, and they have all those values, the likelihood is that they're going to vote for the person that actually represents these values instead of the person that is watering down its own background in order to come somewhat closer to these values. I'm not sure why people suddenly make that small distinction in their head. I think their own framing goes against it. Why then do you still get the people to exactly win over this swing state? I don't need to prove that you're going to win over a large middle group in this state. It often goes only on the fringes that you need to win. There's two reasons why I think it's better to be distinguished. One, most people who swing don't swing because they read all the policy manuals and all the slight policy notions that Shoria does. I think Shoria does. I think the average upper class American voter does not. So the reason why they often do it is because they were disappointed by the output of the policies that the other candidate did before. For example, the Democrats. So that means that they often don't believe anymore in the policies that are putting forward. That means that even if they like if there's a long rationale for saying why in the long term some form of military involvement is good. If you saw a lot of wars and you saw a lot of inflation, the next time you're probably thinking, I don't want that war anymore. I'm going to vote for the candidate that's outspoken against it because the other candidate fucked up. That means you want your Republican candidate to be more outspokenly populist or more outspokenly saying taxes are going down and we're going to help you more or the people there more, because that is something that you're probably more incentivized to do. But the second thing is that in these states, often the swing is not just because you convince all the hardcore Democrats or all the people who are so extremely liberal, as Shoria says, and highly educated, to suddenly go Republican, because most of those people have been Democrats for their entire lives and they don't want to swing. The swing is often also because people don't turn out, i.e. your Republican policy last time was really, really poor, or your Democratic policy last time was really, really poor. And no, Shoria assumes that people in the Republican side already fucked up and therefore they don't want them anymore. I think that is one, a very big assumption, and two, it's empirically also completely not true. Most Republicans or most people right now think that Trump should be elected again because they feel like they've been neglected by the Biden policy, because they feel like this is actually the right thing, and they don't think that it's gone too far, which is why this is the entire point why Trump is going in the race right now. We're not sure who's going to win. So the reason why you should probably take a harder populist stance is because comparatively this stands out better towards the other candidate. Before I'm going to weigh on why, compared with Adrian's framing, this is going to be more impactful than all the nuanced versions of why you're liberal, closing.
So the Biden administration has been criticized for being very inflationary, for doing lots of protectionist things like subsidizing domestic industries. So if you want to distinguish yourself from the previous administration, surely you do free trade instead.
Like, sorry, again, the Infoslide says we have some form of free trade. The Infoslide on your side said you need to do a lot more than say we're going to have extreme liberal policy. So I think if you're a Democrat, then yes, you should probably run for like the more extreme version of Biden. I think if you're a Republican and you're catering to voters that already dislike these, that probably feel more solidarity with people who already vote for populist things, being more distinguished is then the better option for yourself to set yourself out and get off. Adrian already explains in quite some framing why a large bulk of these people, probably by the framing I just gave you, I think Shoria's framing is probably true for some part of the other people as well. But the comparative in this debate is whether those people are going to vote Democrat or Republican, because that's the only two choices they have. The people that Shoria is describing are already going to vote Democrat. So that is not the people that you want to cater to if you are a Republican and you're catering along the exact same lines. This is why you probably want to distinguish yourself for the small people that don't want to vote, that otherwise are not going to vote, or vote Democrat because they're just genuinely against you, or don't, or think that that is the better option given the two options that they have. I think that is an incredibly stupid idea, and I think combined with the idea that you can now also on these policies ride on a bigger campaign, get more media attention, and ride with the Trump rate as Adrian describes to you, the likely chances that you get those 2 or 3 more votes that get you into Congress is much, much larger. It doesn't matter whether Trump then will fill over the long term. You want to get into Congress now, and I think this is the best way to do it. Proud to oppose.
Thank you very much to the speaker for that very fine speech. We now call on the closing government member to address the House here.
Okay.
Can I be heard? Okay, sure.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, I thought you didn't hear me.
Oh, sorry. No, yeah. Can you guys hear me?
Sure, yeah, I can.
Right. The question I want to start off this speech with is, what is most decisive for the way in which people vote? And to a certain degree, people vote based on rational self-interest. We think that this one policy proposed will just be in our rational self-interest. And, if you do all the maths and read all the studies, it's probably going to be better for us, like marginally. But I think most of all, the reason why people vote is based on a sense of identity, who you feel you are and which party reflects that. Not necessarily which party necessarily, all the little technical policies are in your best interest, but an environment that you belong to, right? One that actually reflects the values that you have grown up with, the one that you think that reflects your values. And the reason why a lot of well-educated, upper middle class, urban Republicans have been drifting to the Democrats in recent years, even when the Republican Party still protects their rational self-interest in many cases, for example, they're still the party of lower taxes, they're still the party of big business, the reason why these Republicans are drifting away is because they feel uncomfortable. They feel icky, voting for the Republican Party, because the Republicans of the Mitt Romney and the McCain days just feel like this is an environment that they no longer belong in, that this is an alien Republican Party, one that they have never seen before, and they feel like it doesn't reflect their interest and identity anymore. Two reasons why I think that you can weaponize this framing very, very well if you go for neoconservative ideas, and why that reflects these Republican sense of identity far more. Firstly, these Republicans are deeply wedded to an earlier conception of the US as a global leader and a protector of Western values like democracy and freedom. These are the voters that grew up, for example, at the tail end of the Cold War, that grew up with this idea that the US needs to stand up for Western values. They need to stand up for democracy, the promotion of free trade, and the Washington Consensus. These are upper middle class voters, most likely in the 40s and 50s and above, who remember a time when the US was recognized as a global leader, and moreover, have a self-image as someone who is better than everyone. They've grown up with these high and lofty values, the democracy and freedom that they want to export to everyone, because they are the smart ones, and they are the good ones, and they're the ones that are telling everyone else in the world how to be smart and good. Not saying that this is actually like a good thing or not, this is just how they think of themselves. And these are the Republicans that have been alienated by the MAGA movement's isolationism and shirking of what they see as the traditional duties and obligations of the US to the rest of the world. And notably, now, as a neoconservative Republican, you go back to those traditional values. You tap into that sense of identity and say, no, we need to stand up as a global leader again. We can no longer just wall ourselves off from the rest of the world and lose our reputation and our influence over the world. That is what crucially encourages people to come out and vote. These are the Republicans that would otherwise have been apathetic and sat at home, because this is recognized as important, right? You need to galvanize people to actually get up off of their couches, to take a day off work and go to the voting booth. The way that you do that is via a sense of urgency, the narrative that we need urgently to protect the US's standing in the world. We need to fulfill our duties, versus the comparative narrative, which is we just like do nothing, like we just kind of stay in the US and don't really do anything. We shirk these duties and we're kind of lazy and irresponsible. Like obviously that is not a narrative that particularly encourages people to like make sacrifices and go out and vote, especially in a volatile international context like the conflicts going on in the Middle East. A lot of Republicans feel like the US needs to stand up. They need to kind of go back into this area of the world and be the protector of Western values. They need to stand up for all of these things. Maybe that is a bad idea, rationally speaking, but that is how they see themselves, these traditional sort of McCain and Romney Republicans. Second thing, these Republicans view the economic populism of the MAGA movement as economically unorthodox and stupid. I'm not going to weigh in on the clash on top up as to whether this is actually in their rational self-interest or not. Opening government, I think, gives you very fair reasons to believe that some voters want free trade because it leads to cheaper import materials. Opening opposition gives fair reasons as to why some voters, like different subsects within the set of voters we're talking about, will want protection from global competition. And importantly to note, DLO admits that people don't just care about their own jobs, but they also care about what they think is good for the economy in general. So the more important question you have to ask is, what do these Republicans see as sensible and normal economic policy? What they see as sensible and normal is free trade. Why is that the case? Firstly, because they are college educated, and the economic orthodoxy in universities has been free trade for like the last 7 years. Secondly, they read The Economist and the Financial Times. They access this media. They watch the news, which predominantly do have free market capitalist leanings. And thirdly, they've grown up at a time when Ronald Reagan was the icon of the Republican Party, the torchbearer of the Republican Party. And his entire narrative, his entire conception of the Republican Party, as well as John McCain and Mitt Romney, was being economically sensible, balancing the books, having low inflation, having free markets so that we have more freedom. People can do and involve themselves in transactions that they want to do. That is the way in which we get ourselves out of these problems. And on the comparative, they view the populism of the blue-collar working class movement, MAGA movement, as just rabble rousers, people that aren't as intelligent as them, people that don't know as much about the economy as them, and they view these people with condescension and mistrust. And that is the reason why they've turned away from economic populism, even in the cases that we might admit that is in their rational self-interest. So when they ask themselves, what is the answer to the rampant inflation we are seeing in the world? The answer is free trade, because that is what they have been grown up to be taught. Opening opposition.
We win the ideology clash because we tell people that we will make America great again rather than prioritizing Chinese benefits.
But the question is like, how do we make America great again? And the way that we make America great again is the stuff that they've been grown up believing makes America great again. And that's all the stuff that I've talked about. Why is this economic argument better than opening government? I just think that for all of the good reasons that opening government give, this is a bit more certain because it's not contingent on whether or not you believe a bunch of premises that opening government relies on to prove that this is indeed within the vast majority's voters' self-interest and they do vote on their own self-interest, rather than more generally what they believe is sensible and orthodox economic practice. Because we don't need to buy that free trade is actually going to be better for these people. We just need to prove that they feel like it's better in general. Okay, just a little bit of framing to close out the speech. DLO says, well, if these voters want all these things, why won't they go to the Democrats? The thing is, free trade and US superpower ideology have always been the strong suit of the Republican Party. And if they make that the battleground that they fight the Democrats on, they will always be seen as more reliable, they will always be seen as more trustworthy, and they will always win out. And it's only when Republicans abandon these values that voters then feel like they need to go to the Democrats. The weighing is this: MAGA extremists will always go for the Republican Party because they have very little alternatives, and they enthusiastically go out to vote anyway because they feel like the US will collapse under the Democrats. It is the middle ground, these well-educated, well-off voters who we need to win over, and this is the way that we should do so. Very proud to govern.
Thank you very much to the speaker for the very fine speech. We call on a member of the opposition to address the House here.
Hi, can I be heard?
Yeah, you can be heard.
Nice. Okay, let me. All right, boys. I'll take a POI from OG, like 5:45-ish. I'll call on you to take it. Ready? Can I start?
Yeah.
First main argument and extension, neoconservative free trade is both objectively and politically horrible in the eyes of these voters. Two main mechanisms here. First mechanism, it just significantly favors like the type of Chinese manufacturing businesses that literally push you out of the economy. The reason for this is that these businesses are able to produce goods for far cheaper than you. They can cut corners in the production lines. They're not bound by strict environmental and employment regulations. What they do then is that they're able to outcompete American competitors by artificially lowering prices temporarily to push them out of the market and then raising those prices again once those smaller American companies are dead. Additionally, this creates a chilling effect on American investment. That is, when you know that the Chinese firms can do this and that the American government is not going to step in to protect you or your investments, you're not willing to take on this risk in the first place. What this means then is that fewer and fewer people are willing to invest on smaller and medium-sized American firms over like the big reliable Chinese firms or only the largest American firms on side government. Importantly, this directly harms the economic well-being of these voters. Their businesses are in decline, and that is where investment gets pushed away from them. The problem then is that it's not true for government to just assert that you're going to be economically healthy on their side of the house. They're not able to protect those actors from China, and that is when you lose the votes of these individuals. Next burden under this mechanism. Why do these upper middle class voters care about this? And OG here are wrong to say that this is a debate about like MNC executives. Like, very trivially, the people who hold those positions are upper class. They're the ones who are making like 7-digit salaries most of the time. What this debate about is about some like middle managers in those big firms, but predominantly this is more about people in smaller regional firms. This is about self-employed professionals, people who are hurt and who cannot stand up to big foreign actors without this type of protection. If they're high-ranking business executives, what happens then is that it becomes more difficult for you to be able to compete with your competition. That is, when you have additional big actors coming in, that is exactly when you're pushed closer to your profit margin and you're less able to get yourself like either the big salary bonuses or to protect your company from economic shocks. That is exactly when China is most able to hurt you. Secondly, though, if you do own your smaller business, you'll be the first to be pushed out. And that is exactly why we've seen a decline in American economics. I want to basically respond directly to the only mechanism that OG gives about why it is that the economy is going to be fine regardless, which is this idea that like tariffs are tit for tat, and therefore if you do this, China doesn't sell goods to you anymore. Note why this doesn't work. Very simply, simply, China depends on the US far more than the US depends on China. This is because the US is literally the biggest importer of Chinese goods. It is the case that if China tries to put these tariffs back, it's going to basically lose a lot of its throughput in a way that directly harms its economy. But also, more importantly, China doesn't want to escalate trade wars. That is, China wants a return to normalcy, so they're going to be conciliatory. They're unlikely to impose inverse tariffs, and therefore this means that they're going to continue trading with you because they want to be able to keep expanding and to continue benefiting, especially from things like American foreign investment. Second mechanism, though, is that this is a swing district. This means that the Democrats here are already going to be campaigning for this type of protectionism, which is in line with American foreign policy during both the Biden and the Trump administration. Voters have a revealed preference for these features because they work in favor of the American economy. What is the alternative then in this debate? Two things. Firstly, protectionism just selfishly benefits these actors and their bottom line. Your business thrives when you're getting this type of government support. Importantly, though, in this response to CG, Republican protectionism is ideal for these voters compared to Democratic measures. This is because Republicans are heavily anti-tax, and they most often will fund protectionist measures through additional lending, as opposed to raising taxes on these groups. Democrats would instead be taxing these same individuals. This is because lending is far easier for Republicans to conceal, and then they just blame it on the Democrats during the next election cycle. Secondly, and this is where the nuance is being missed in this debate, populism is far more flexible instead of being ideologically locked. That is, what happens in this debate is that you're still supporting free market policies, but largely only within the American economy. Protectionism kicks in to protect you from foreign actors. This means then that you still sate the desire of these voters for a free market. What you're doing, though, is you're protecting them from the big bad boogeyman that is China. It is very politically trendy to blame things on China, and therefore I just don't think CG is right to say that voters are going to be very open to trading with them or perceive them as this sort of benevolent market actor. Second argument, then, after the first extension, has to do directly with how it is that this fucks your chances of doing all with the Republican Party. What I have established so far is that you economically get fucked, but I want to talk about the politics as well. Before that, I'll take OJ real quick, please.
Even if you think China, which provides cheap labor and raw materials, which is then sold by people in the US, is going to replace the service sector, all of them, even if they're uncertain, buy things from China, which cost them a lot lesser on our side.
So there are three issues with what you're claiming. Firstly, Chinese goods are cheap right now, but they will get more expensive when they crowd out the market. Just see what has happened in the past. Secondly, China is no longer just doing raw materials. China is branching both into large manufacturing, including more technical goods, as well as things like the service sector. So it's no longer the case that they're just helping you. Now they're directly competing with you, and they want to hurt you. The third reason, though, is that I just think you largely see these goods are more shoddy more often, and I don't think you're likely to feel that hurt if you're no longer able to purchase them. On to the second argument, then, about your political prospects being killed. Two burdens here, and I'm not sure the sum of this, but I'm not complete the argument. Firstly, Trumpism dominates the Republican Party, and this is true regardless of whether Trump wins the election. Three reasons here. Firstly, Trumpism is the orthodoxy to being considered Republican right now. After the assassination attempt, when Trump literally became Jesus, it's not just that Trump endorsement is good, but rather that Republicans see you as a traitor to the party line if you don't follow what the candidate is saying. So the second reason, though, is that Trump has appointed many of his stooges in the positions of power within the party. And the writing is on the wall that traditional Republicanism is likely dead. This is also true in the eyes of voters, though. That is, when they elected Trump in 2016, these were the exact same people who you're appealing to and got him into the Oval Office. The third reason, though, is that parties care about loyalty. It's how they pass policy. OG here tried to say that you're going to, basically align with Cruz and with Haley. The issue, though, here is that to be anti-Trump, you don't have to take an anti-Trump position during the election itself, because that is when that is seen as political suicide and as treason against your own party. Note then the second piece of weighing here. It is very unlikely that what this individual candidate says is going to swing the election. That is, people are more likely to see what is being said by the candidates or national headlines. The only thing this does, though, is it alienates you from the Republican mainstream. That is, it is far more difficult for you to resecure your nomination in the next election cycle. Someone else is likely to replace you, and you're far less likely to get something like a committee or a cabinet appointment after the election as well. Not only is protectionism horrible, this is political suicide. I'm very, very proud to oppose.
Thank you very much to the speaker for a very fine speech. We call on the whip of government to summarize the debates for the government's mention for the present government. You're here.
Excellent. Am I audible? Can you hear me?
Yeah, audible.
Awesome. Just a sec. Bum, 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 bum. Mm-mm. Everyone in this debate agrees that the debate-winning clash is what makes this candidate most likely to win. And then the entire opening half just engages in this back and forth about why free trade is good or bad for upper middle classers, which is just to me obviously ridiculous. Like, no one stays up at night thinking about the newest bill or like calculating the exact multiple that's going to come and how that's going to discount the future of their work. They think about their spouse, they think about their kids, they think about their neighbors and their community, they think about themselves and their perceptions of themselves. What does this mean for the debate? I don't care whether OO or OG is right about free trade. I don't care whether CO is right about free trade. Spoiler, Nobel Prize economists haven't yet been able to figure out whether free trade is actually good or bad for people and whether it fucks you up more or it helps you more. What I do think is that people don't think rationally about free trade. Why? All of the reasons Aiden talks about, but also, spoiler alert, most people don't have education in economics that goes as far as being able to process all of these complexities. Rather, people from a very early age in life subscribe to an ideology of free trade that is being taught to them at the benches of the Ivy League universities that they have likely studied and at the benches of the colleges that they have likely attended, right? So whether or not rationally people calculate what happens with free trade is out of this debate. How they feel about that and whether or not they support it viscerally is what's winning this debate. I also don't think that the OG claim of consumption is as huge as they claim it to be, which is that the prices are going to go huge. And as a result, you're going to get fucked. Like, it's probably true, as OO says, that these people, are upper middle class, have enough savings to, wither inflation away. So it's not going to be like, oh my God, I can no longer afford bread. That's probably not likely to be the case in this debate. Based on this, what do these people want in a congressman? Two things are important here. One, what matters most to these people is their conception of themselves as people with true integrity and with true American values. What matters most to these people is what they show their children as an example when they take them to the voting booth, what they talk about when they see the voting campaign around them, and whether or not they can be proud to stand behind a candidate. That is a visceral thing. But also, I want to just have a discussion, which just seems crazy to me that nobody's had in this debate, which is just to ask, what the hell does a congressman do? Because congressmen don't create actual policy or like tangible thing on the ground. What they do is they go to Congress and they debate bills and they introduce resolutions. What does this mean? This means that when you're going to the voting poll that you're not voting for president, you're voting for the person who is going to represent you, right? Which means that all of these values, i.e., do you see yourself in this person, become infinitely more important, right? And here's the kicker in this debate and why we win. Do not underestimate how much these people care about manners, how much they care about decency, how much they care about politeness. Think about any average white middle-aged 50-year-old man who loves to be polite and nice to people and loves to smile nicely to people and understand how much they care about how they come across and how they are perceived and whether they are seen to have character. Aiden is the only one that caters to this. The people who grew up with Mitt Romney and Reagan and Nixon, that's their model for who they want to have. That's the debate winning, and that's why CG, which is the only team that recognizes this, wins. I now want to deal extraneously with the other teams in this debate. No, thank you. From closing opposition, we get that essentially small businesses are going to get fucked with slightly better mechanisms and more complex mechanisms that perhaps opening opposition gives here. The problem, though, is that Chris's entire speech is just fucking factual. He argues China is not going to retaliate. Bro, we thought that in 2018, and then we stumbled upon a massive trade war that had billions of dollars worth of costs for everyone involved, right? But also, secondly, and crucially, yes, perhaps everything that Chris says is true, and the imports that come from China are significantly cheaper. The thing that you have to remember is that the people we're talking about don't compete on those lines because the businesses they're most likely engaged in are, one, services, and 2, innovation and intellectual property, right? So just because Chris says China is now branching out doesn't mean it is a meaningful competitor. It's likely going to take decades because intellectual innovation takes decades. It takes entire histories of being able to innovate. So that's not actually what matters most, even viscerally, to these people. People don't go to the booths with an Excel. They go to the booths with what they think they ought to see in a candidate. The final thing that Chris says is that you need to be Trumpist at this point to be in a party because Trump is now kind of like a messiah. Again, like, untrue. Like, have you seen the amount of Republicans currently going out and creating entire campaigns of like Republicans for Harris? The amount of Republican donors who are giving money to the Harris campaign, not another like lesser Republican, but actual Kamala Harris. This actually shows you why Trumpism is going down at a preference for these people and why in a presidential race where they have no other option, they would go as far as voting for Harris. Now I'm going to deal with how this deals at a congressional option and why giving them an option is like much better. Before that point, opening.
The way you win irrational voters is by appealing to anti-immigration sentiment and by differentiating yourself from the Democrats, also CO is.
Your problem is that you call them irrational voters. Everyone is an irrational voters. That's the kicker of the case. Everyone votes, or like 95% of people vote less rationally, vote based on sentiment. So there goes your frame. Finally, then, engaging with opening opposition. There are 3 main things coming from opening opposition. The first thing that they say is that you're going to capitalize on support for Donald Trump, which they kind of agree with CO here, which I think is stupid. Guys, Trump is no longer a new arrival in US politics. Like, he's been around for a decade. And the fact that this state in the motion is still a swing state and has not gone fully red probably gives you some information about the type of salience that Donald Trump has in the state, which is why you should probably discredit all of this rhetoric of you need to attach yourself to Trump to have any chance of winning. But the more important thing coming from opening opposition is that you have to meaningfully differentiate yourself from Democrats. The problem with that is that it misidentifies who these swing voters are. Because the kicker here is that these people we're talking about would never have voted Democrat in the first place, because as the Infoslide says they don't align on social issues. What these people would have done when faced with a Trump-like and a Democrat would have been stay at home. They likely in the Congress wouldn't have done much to deal with that because, again, it's not a presidential race. It is Congress. This is what OO unsees. This is what we galvanize by giving them a true option. This is how we win. We clash on OO with one thing, which is that voters have personal stakes in their children not fighting wars. Obviously, most of these the people, 1, know that wars are fought differently these days. 2, know that most of these wars are going to be proxy wars, so it's not going to be their children. 3, knows that at most their money goes to war, but their child is unlikely to in the current climate. For all of these reasons, we win this debate. Thanks.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you to that speaker for that very fine speech. We now call on the whip of opposition to summarize the debates as a whole and for the closing opposition here. Hello, I can be heard, yeah?
Yep.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Sure. Yeah, I can hear you.
All right. I'll take OG again. Just put it in the chat. I'll call on you again. Same deal. Just do it again. Sounds good. All right. The thing I want to do at the very top of this whip speech is just like get rid of the sort of like very hand wavy magic trick coming from CG here, which is this entire idea of like, Free trade is just this like completely theoretical thing that has no effect on people's lives. Very crucially, not surprising at all, the economic policies you take, which dictate the like direction of the American economy, has a very direct and tangible effect on people's lives. It controls whether the US goes into recession. It controls whether your business shrinks or dies. It controls whether people lose their jobs. What this means then is that even if the theoretical nuance may be lost on these people, and I want to note that CG here flip-flops between saying that these people like free trade or that they cannot understand free trade, it still means that you care about the effects of these policies and that these are issues that are like important in the political discussion within the country. Therefore, I just don't think you can just say that these are things which voters are not going to consider. And importantly, these are things which shape your political perspective and your opinion of different actors. That is, even if you grew up as a free trade supporter, if free trade keeps slapping you in the face, you presumably change your mind eventually. And my case here is very simple. The reason Trump was able to win so handily, including by persuading the more center wing of the right-wing party, is because Republicans understand that free trade in that sense no longer works. We're no longer lived in the 90s and we're no longer in Kansas. Therefore, it's the case that you need like a more nuanced economic policy to be able to deal with the sort of competition that you can expect from actors like China. The next thing I want to do is do some rebuilding and deal with like the three responses that Elena gives to the case. The first one is basically just this like brute assertion that China does retaliate because see 2018. I don't know what you want me to see at 2018, and I don't think it's something you can just assert. However, here, I do want to distinguish, even if you're right, even if it's the case that China was able to do this then, not why it cannot do this now. Firstly, China is uniquely vulnerable exactly because of the huge property bubble it's currently getting itself out of, and because of the slowdown in domestic economic growth. Therefore, this is not a time, especially when you're trying to expand it to things like the EV market, and you need to be able to sell to foreign economies, that you're able to afford to counter-tariff those potential trade partners. Secondly, though, the US tariffs that were imposed by the Biden and Trump administrations hurt. China wants to get rid of these. They don't want to escalate things even further. Therefore, further tariffs are very, very unlikely. Note how this deals with the OG case. For the OG argument to work, they had to prove to you why putting tariffs on China hurts local businesses. I show you why this isn't true. You're able to have your cake and eat it too. That is, by putting tariffs on Chinese businesses, it is easier for you to sell your goods, you're less likely to be outcompeted, your business thrives, and it doesn't come out of your own pocket the way it would on the side of the Democrats. The next thing Elena says is that innovation is going to take decades, and therefore this means that China cannot compete with American firms. What innovation takes is 1.4 billion and some intellectual property theft. And China has both of those things. It's very easy for China to branch into these new sectors, and empirically they have been, especially things like, high-tech manufacturing, especially as China has more and more of like an educated middle class of engineers and professionals who can do this for them. The last thing I want to respond to from CG, though, is this idea that Trumpism is now going to go down. And this is going to directly respond to what we hear from opening government as well. Trump isn't just an individual. Trumpism is a movement in terms of how politics are perceived. And the thing is that being educated doesn't mean that you're uniquely situated to avoid these pressures. That is, the reason that these people were ever voting for free trade policy in the first place is because they're able to live in a time where, as Aidan says, yes, you're able to believe in the system. The thing is, though, that all voters, including these voters, are disillusioned by the current political climate in the States. They see the sort of civil and economic unrest in the country. They see things like the 2008 crisis, which hurt them, and they can see practically that free trade doesn't help them and that mainstream Republican policy is harmful to them. The people Aidan wants to talk about in this debate are the people who are already rich and wealthy, the people who always benefit from free trade. I explained to you why the upper middle class will be the people who are harmed under the sort of unequivocal free trade that McCain would be advocating for. Look, this type of free trade didn't even win the Republicans any elections in the 2000s or the 2010s. I don't know why this is not going to magically change, especially when protectionism has been working well for the economy of the United States. Therefore, then, I don't think you ought believe CG when they tell you that you're not going to care about these values. The last response against CG, though, is that just because you cared about these things when you were younger doesn't mean you still see things the same way. That is, you're more likely to see China as a threat now, and therefore you care about doing things like imposing tariffs or punishing them, and therefore being able to harm them more. Note then how my extension beats this. Firstly, I explained to you why it's the case that for national elections, you're probably not going to listen to the candidates that much anyway. You care more about what Trump is saying. The thing is then, you're less likely to trust a candidate that is flip-flopping. That is, when you see someone who is going against your candidate in a manner that is literal electoral suicide, you're less likely to see them as reliable or even as someone who can affect policy. That is, if you're the only one who wants free trade in your entire party or a very small minority, you're never going to get this passed in the first place. Therefore, I both rebut CG, but I also explain why their case doesn't matter at the end of the day, because they're unlikely to think you're going to be able to get this change. Next up then, let's talk about OG and the economic argument they bring. The argument here from OG is just that you benefit from the cheaper goods and that these goods now become more expensive. I'll take OG before that. Yeah, please.
Some people like cheap Chinese products, some don't. But when protectionism and subsidies increase taxes for everyone, and the president wants to attack your right to protest, which are the unique mechanisms we give you never respond to, these are deadlock.
So let me respond to these very quickly. Firstly, the right to protest is not part of the debate. Read the Infoslide. The second response, however, is that the issue with the Chinese goods mechanism that you give is that these are not the groups of people who want to be consuming these products most of the time. The thing is, though, I point out to you why you're still going to be able to get the Chinese imports at most likely the same prices to begin with. And the thing is, though, that even if China imposes converse tariffs, note why you care far more about the long-term prospects. Even if some goods are more expensive, this has a smaller impact than you going out of business. Therefore, it's the case that you're more likely to be self-interested in protecting your market interests, protecting your job, protecting the company that you have worked so hard to build on your side of the house. Therefore, then, note what this means. When you do care about free trade, this reflects on how you want things to be run domestically within the United States. What happens, though, is that when you see a candidate who wants to advocate for the exact sorts of policies that basically take all your money and they put it in Chinese firms who are able to raise prices, as they often have been doing when they don't have competition against them, that is exactly when you put yourself in a position against the Republican Party. The path to victory from CO is clear and twofold. Either you believe me that it's the case that this person is seen as a traitor to the party and doesn't really make a change in the voters do care, but even when the voters do care, they most likely hate free market economics. There's a reason this hasn't been done, and for all these reasons, I'm very proud to oppose.
All right. Thank you everyone for such a great debate. So myself and my panelists are going to now go over the OE. So just like everyone else to go back to the